For the past 40 years, Redefine Properties chairman, Marc Wainer, has been doing business in property. His new book, Making My Mark, chronicles his career, and he joins us in the studio now. Where is that book, Marc? It's a nice bright cover, like you, a nice bright personality. Looks fun.
It's got this good-looking guy on the cover.
Great-looking guy on the cover, nice red tie, red, right, flamboyant stuff. You started this was an idea with Ian Fife, who was the property writer at the Financial Mail.
Correct.
He then died suddenly. What happened?
We'd just done a few pages of the first chapter, and then, because this was a passion of Ian's, it was something he wanted me to do. He died, so I shelved the idea. About a year later, his lady partner came to see me for some advice on some shares she had written, and she said, please, Ian was really excited about the book, write it. I didn't know anybody who could write it, so I kind of left it. And then one day I was talking to an agent that we do business with, and he told me that his son, Tudor, who wrote the book, was a journalist. I said, let him come and see me. And for my sins, that was the start. And whenever we had a bit of time and edited, and that was the start of the book.
I've glanced through it, haven't been able to read it before, but it's an easy book to read. There are lots of stories, anecdotes, lessons learned. But he starts the book, which I think is good, almost like at the end rather than the beginning. The biggest deal was the Canal Walk, and a big risk. In essence there, you bought the Canal Walk development in Cape Town for 300 million rand less than it cost to build. That sounds like big deal, but also big risks. Tell us about that deal.
Well, at the time, we tried to buy Canal Walk, as many other people had, from BOE. At the time, you know, there was a 1.5 billion exposure for BOE, which was much too big for a bank that size, and they couldn't afford to take the knock. Came the A2 crisis, and you'll recall that Nedbank then absorbed BOE with a bit of assistance from the Reserve Bank, so they bought it relatively cheaply, and they went through a tender process, which we participated in. I was acting for Hyprop at the time, so we were the minnows. But we came up with two ideas. The one was the board said we would pay 1.2 billion, 1.205 in fact.
A lot of money then.
A lot of money for Hyprop. Hyprop's market cap was about 400 or 500 million. So it was a huge deal for Hyprop. And so the first bid we made, we said we'll offer 1.205 or 5 million more than the next higher bid, whichever is the lower. Nedbank came back and said, no way, that's not ethical, so you can't do that. And when we were doing due diligence, because what happens when you get into the second round, you go to a war room, you look at all the leases. This was in Cape Town. Went down and all we saw were lawyers, no property people, because there were a whole lot of issues with rates and various aspects with the property. So the agreement was simple, but the disclaimers took up pages and pages. We looked at it. It was a new centre. It was 2 or 3 years old. You could do due diligence till you were blue in the face. We did the financial due diligence, and then we decided that this whole issue with the rates, which could have involved, it was in total about 12 or 13 million of income a year, but most of the smaller tenants were paying it. The dispute was with the majors. So we said, you know, that's 5 or 6 million, and let's go to the bank, because from my time at Investec, I knew banks don't like to have what we call tails. So we said to them, we'll offer you 1,140,000 and take it as is, and we'll worry about the rates. They liked that, and they pushed the price up by another 10 million, and that's how we got the Canal Walk for 1,150,000.
In a way, a culmination of a long career in property, and you used everything you'd learned. Let's go right back to the beginning. Working in your parents' shop on Louis Botha Avenue opposite King Edward's, which was called Teddy Bear Fisheries at the time.
That's correct.
What did you do there?
What did I do there? I hated it. It was, we did everything. When I was in the business full-time, when I was a kid, we just helped sorting out the cool drink bottles, and there was no self-service in those days. So if you came in and you wanted tea, we took the tea and handed it over the counter. But so
a bit of skellum work on your part with the bottles?
Well, that's debatable. Is it skellum or is it entrepreneurship? That's why I put it in. So when I was about 8 or 9, we were working in the shop on a Saturday morning, and my brother, who was 2 years older than me, was allowed to work in the shop, and my job was to be in the yard and sort out the cold drink bottles into the right boxes as they were returned. And he got 50 cents a day and I got 25, so I felt I was very hard done by. So what I used to do was take 4 or 5 bottles. I think they were 2.5 cents deposit. find a passerby, give him 5 bottles, say go inside and cash them in and I'll give you something, until I made up the 25 cents.
Yes.
And I thought I was being very smart, but probably about 15 or 20 years later, I was talking to my mother. My father had passed away. And I said to her, you ripped me off, you underpaid me. And she said, yes, but you made it up by selling the bottles. So she knew, because the mistake I made was using the same guy all the time to go round and round.
So you learned a lesson there.
So I learned a lesson.
Also, you must have been one of the very first intakes for national service, conscription.
1966, yeah.
And you tell a nice story about lilos and condoms when you were in the army. Tell that.
Well, when I was in the army, of course, in 1966, we didn't have the kind of sexual freedom that came much later. So I discovered, first of all, the army was a big wake-up call for me. I'd never met people from the Boerland and Beaufort West. So, and when it came time to get passes, everybody would come back from these passes talking about their sexual conquests. And it was obviously nonsense. So I hit on the idea of selling condoms, because everybody was embarrassed to go into a chemist. And I think they were 25 cents for 3, and I was selling them for about R1, bearing in mind that you were earning 15 Rand a month in the army, 50 cents a day. So, and of course it was a roaring trade, because these guys were coming, give me 4 boxes, 6 boxes.
Showing off.
Showing off. So that was really the start of my trading career, if you like.
You also got into property almost by chance. There's a lovely story of how you got your job as a property, as a shopping centre manager, because you were the only guy who'd actually taken the trouble to go to the centre before the interview.
Yes, well, what happened was we sold the family business. I was now looking for a job where I wouldn't have to sit in an office and ask somebody, can I have my tea break from 11 to 12 instead of... And I saw this advert for a shopping centre manager. I didn't know what it was, but I didn't know what a shopping centre was. It was a new concept in South Africa. It said for Kempton City, so I wrote a letter, I got an interview. I thought, well, I better go and see what this thing is about. I didn't even know where Kempton Park was. Yeah. So I drove
Little
out
known
to
Beaufort
Kempton.
West.
Yes. So I drove out, walked around the centre, looked at a few things, and coming from a retail background, saw a few things that I didn't like. The steakhouse was right in the middle with dirty windows and stuff like that. And when I had the interview, they said, what would you do? And I said, the steakhouse. And they said, have you been to see the centre? I said, yes. And I was the only one who had, and that got me the job. So.
Amazing story. You've met a couple of characters, and you talk about some of them in the book. One that comes to mind is a guy called Jaime Weinberg. Tell me the story of his attitude to rent, because he owned buildings where people had to pay rent.
Jaime Weinberg was a very remarkable guy, uneducated guy, came from Eastern Europe as a chaperone to an aunt, ended up in Kempton Park with a little butcher shop, and ended up owning half of Kempton Park. And he was a really tough guy, but a lot of integrity. So I was in his office. We used to do his rent collection one day. It was the time of the Angolan War. A lady came in with 2 little kids, crying that the South African Defence Force hadn't sent her the money, and if she paid the rent, she wouldn't be able to feed the kids. And he said, I don't care, rent is rent, and you pay the rent or I'm going to evict you. And with sort of tears streaming down her face, she paid the rent, and he said, wait here, went into his office and came back and gave her money. And afterwards I said to him, Jaime, I don't understand that. I mean, why did you put her through that? He said, she must understand, pay the rent. If I want to give her money for food for her kids, that's my business. But she must know, pay the rent.
So it's a tough world, and you've taken some knocks. You talk about some of the knocks. And the point you make, and the book is great, because the little sections where it says lessons learned, it sets it out. This is the lesson I learned. You got tips, you got advice. What was the worst knock you had in your career, and how did you come back from it?
The worst knock I had in my career was really the start of my success. It was in 1998 when interest rates were going up to 25%. I'd left Investec, started my own business, and put syndicates together. So I signed for the mortgages, the investors put in the equity. We were buying buildings at 11-12% and gearing them 80%. So, and I'd signed for the bonds. And what we saw was 25% interest rates, the tenants' restaurants going bust, so your 12% became 8, your bond payments were 25, and I was going bust. So that was probably the worst experience of my life. And that's when we looked at the listed sector, and that became the start of Redefine. So from adversity came success.
Are you thinking of stopping, or are you just going to plough on?
No, well, I can't stop. There's nothing for me to do. But I must say I'm enjoying, not financially, writing a book, I'm sure you know, is not exactly a financial success. But I mean, last week I had a young agent come and see me with quite a nice property that he had a mandate to sell. The buyer had to pay commission. And the first thing he said to me, lessons learned, chapter 1, negotiate your fees up front. So first I was quite taken aback because my own lessons were being turned on me, but he was right, and hopefully we'll conclude that deal.
Marc Wainer, it's been great chatting to you. Your book is called Making My Mark, Lessons from a Life in Property. There's lots of serious stuff, but it's also personal, and it's got a lot of anecdotes in it. Thanks for coming in, Marc.